Hey everybody, this is Paul. Real quick before we get into the podcast, I just want to let you know that I have launched a new newsletter called Local News Industry Pulse, and it is a briefing of news, policy, trends, and more in the local news industry straight to your inbox every Thursday morning. So if you have a minute, go subscribe to Local News Industry Pulse. You can scroll down in your podcast app and click on the link at the very bottom of the show notes right now, or go to localnewsindustrypulse.beehiiv.com. That's localnewsindustrypulse.beehiiv.com/subscribe, and you can sign up there. Let's get into today's episode.
So that we move away from the kind of transactional nature of access to journalism, where people pay in exchange for access to a product. And the idea is, let's keep the information available and open to everyone for free. Let's make it democratically accessible, but let's make sure that some people, the people who've got the means, are able to contribute to keeping the information free by paying for it, because there is a cost to producing good quality journalism. And we need to prove the value of that journalism in order to be able to justify that it's worth paying for.
This is Small Press Big Ideas, a podcast about the business of local news in the United States. I'm your host, Paul Gewirtz. Small Press Big Ideas is about the opportunities and challenges that local news publishers are facing for their businesses. I'll sit down and talk with journalists, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and more in the local news industry to find out what's working, what isn't, and how the local news ecosystem can innovate and flourish in the 21st century. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Alec Saelens. Alec is the impact manager at Solutions Journalism Network, where he works aligning the editorial and business objectives behind public service journalism. So, Alec, thank you for being here today. I do appreciate you taking the time.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I kind of read a brief bio about that, but could you just go a little deeper? Just tell us about your life, your background, and kind of what brought you here to where your position now.
Yeah, sure. So by way of background, I'll say that I didn't train as a journalist. I kind of stumbled into it, realizing that there was a real issue with the way in which local media was produced in the UK. And having studied international relations and international law, I realized that, I didn't want to go into those fields directly, but wanted to try and do something about the local media ecosystems and how people accessed information and what they did with it. And that led me to set up a local media cooperative called the Bristol Cable in the city of Bristol in the UK. And that was back in 2014, so almost 10 years ago. And it's a project that is still running. I'm incredibly proud of the project and, happy to see it still do great work. And the people who have kind of taken it on and who are running the shop now are really doing an amazing job with it. After leaving, after 4 years, I went on to do some freelance work as a researcher and then a coach for the Membership Puzzle Project, which was basically studying the emergence of membership models in the news industry. Project set up by Jay Rosen with Emily Goligoski, and then the great Ariel Zirolnik was running the fun part, and that's where the sort of coaching with different news organizations came in. And so I had the pleasure of working with now defunct Devil Strip in Ohio, Akron, and then an organization in France called Mediacité. And then did a bit of freelance work for NewsGuard, an organization that assesses the credibility and transparency of news organizations and gives them a rating using like the kind of nutrition label model. And then I landed at the Solutions Journalism Network to run the pilot project testing how solution journalism could be leveraged to generate revenue. And now I'm the impact manager after having done the revenue part of the work for a few years.
That's excellent. And we can definitely get into that. But I did want to talk to you first about the Bristol Cable, because that's a pretty cool project that you started there. And this show is kind of about, sustainability and business models and stuff. That's kind of what I try and focus on with the podcast in local media. And that was an interesting model. I'd love to hear kind of how the idea came about for the Bristol Cable, and if you could just talk about that experience a little bit, just dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, so with a few friends, a couple of friends, still dear friends nowadays, we kind of were looking around at the local media ecosystem and realizing that the kind of information that was available, produced by local papers, was just pretty poor, very much focused on generating screaming headlines and kind of focusing on scandal, but without giving like much substance to what was going on behind the scenes or on a kind of more systemic level, and not giving much context. And the UK is known for its tabloid media, which, have like a particular political kind of focus. And we wanted to set up something that was a bit of a counterweight to that, and offered a better product on the local level. And so we kind of looked around at the issues with the way local media was set up from a business standpoint, and realized that in fact the kind of profit-seeking incentives that led the kind of large conglomerates that owned most of the local media market in the UK was basically shaping the voice and the kind of editorial tone of these publications. And we wanted to do something different and kind of like take a real aim at kind of redefining local media away from the kind of profit-seeking motive. And so the idea of the cooperative sort of came up because it had been tried by several publications before, but none really adopted a multi-stakeholder model, which basically means that both the employees, the people who work for the organization, and the community are legal shareholders of the organization. And so we wanted to kind of test that out and see whether that idea, that concept had legs. And it turns out that it's still, a success. And we were able to build a model for local news that generated up to 40% of its revenue from membership, as well as bringing in funding and then also a bit of advertising. But what that helped us to do is create an organization that had a governance structure that gave one member and one vote, and no matter like how much financial support they provided us. So it was a democratic model. We made sure that we were engaging with community representatives, members of various different communities across the city, to just hear what the issues that they were faced with were, and to make sure that the reporting that we did helped to serve their information needs. So yeah, that's the kind of short of it.
So just out of curiosity, with that stakeholder model you're speaking about, just kind of from a mechanical, like how it actually works, how does that work as the organization evolves? Like, you left the Bristol Cable. I'm sure new employees come and go. And if everybody gets one vote, is there like a mechanism how that works?
Yeah, so you have a core staff. I think it's up to 10, 12 people nowadays. And, the core team works on the day-to-day operations. One thing I didn't mention was that the focus of the Bristol Cable is on producing investigations and kind of features on a range of different issues, highlighting people who are active in the community and doing things to tackle larger, more deep-seated issues. That really is the focus of our editorial line. And so there is a team, a part of the team that is dedicated to doing that journalistic work, people who are running the kind of business side, people who are running the community engagement side. And every month, or at least that's what it used to be, there used to be some community events organized in various different neighborhoods, city, where we sort of like listened to what people had to say and kind of like brought the ideas that came up, the issues, the concerns that they had into what we thought about doing on an editorial front, and what kind of events we sought to put on, what kind of themes we wanted to kind of tackle. On an annual basis, we organized our annual general meeting. And that is the legally required meeting that every cooperative needs to have to decide on the budget and to decide on the sort of strategic priorities of the organization. And yeah, so the core team, the staff, basically prepared for that meeting. And it's, like any meeting that you have with your board of directors or, shareholders, you sort of like bring them in to vote on certain strategic decisions that pertain to how the organization is managed and the direction that it goes in.
I see. Have you seen any other, and it's still going strong years later, have you seen any other kind of examples in the UK there or in the US or anywhere like that, similar to either following in the mold of the cable or just, kind of sprung up similarly at the same time?
Yeah, there's some organizations that are in the same vein. I mentioned first off Greater Govan Hill, which is based in Scotland. There's also the Mill nowadays in Manchester. They might not have the exact same cooperative model that we did, but they're very much focused on sort of like community engagement and making sure that community voices are represented in how the organizations are managed. And certainly in terms of their funding, I think there's also a big focus on reader-generated revenue.
Excellent. That's great. Very cool. So I'll transition a little bit into SJN a bit now. And you kind of talked about your transition and your kind of in your bio there of your kind of path you took. If there's anything else there, and also if you could just talk about the initial project, because from what I understand, it started off as something maybe like a one-off project. I may have that wrong. And then it's kind of morphed into what it is now, and just maybe kind of what you learned from that and the original cohort of people that were in it.
Yeah, so I was hired by SJN to run the local revenue project, which basically, as I mentioned at the top, tested the hypothesis that solutions journalism could be used to help newsrooms generate some revenue. So what we did is put together a cohort of 12 newsrooms from the United States. They were all from different states, and they had different models, and they had been in existence for different amounts of time, and their editorial focus and output was very broad and sort of diverse as well. And yeah, it was a really fascinating experiment where we first brought them to get up to speed with their practice of solutions journalism, making sure that they were solid in terms of their ability to nail the 4 pillars in their reporting. Just as a quick reminder here, solution journalism, when you do some reporting, needs to present clear explanation of how a response to a problem works. So that's the how part. It needs to present evidence of effectiveness using qualitative and quantitative evidence. It needs to also present insights as to like what makes that response work. And that is like, what are the teachable lessons that you can take away in case you were to replicate that response? And then lastly, it needs to also incorporate some limitations. No response to a problem is a silver bullet, and therefore there will always be some challenges or things that need to be tweaked and improved. So that is what makes solution journalism what it is. So we needed to make sure that everyone in the cohort, all newsrooms, were able to deliver a solid solutions journalism editorial product. And then on the top of that, we then invited them to think about how they could build revenue around that editorial approach. And yeah, the project ran for 12 months, and we came out of that with some really important lessons about the potential for solutions journalism to bolster the business sustainability of media organizations. Some of the key ones were that, first of all, everyone in the cohort, all the participants, came out believing that the innovation of the editorial product focused more on solutions was vital, essential, but also could very much help them generate revenue. 75% of participants did generate some revenue connected to solutions journalism directly. And what we mean by that is that when approaching a financial stakeholder, they pitched their experience in solutions journalism or a project that they wanted to pursue that was going to be oriented in solutions in order to make the case that they needed some money, either for that specific project or as part of larger amounts of funding, including for operational funding. And so what we often heard is, and this was also proved to us by feedback that we received from funders or people who worked with funders separately, that, solutions journalism is something that appeals to organizations that want to fund systems change work, that want to fund work that is programmatic and tackling specific issues in communities, whether it is like health, homelessness, unemployment, so forth. There is a real interest in having media organizations do more solutions-oriented work. And so philanthropic organizations came out on top as the primary providers of revenue for the news organization that we worked with in that first cohort. But we also saw that they were able to pitch this approach in this type of work with local businesses who came on board as sponsors of the work. We also saw that there was traction with major donors, sort of high net worth individuals that were already supporting media organizations. We saw that they were amenable to give more money when they heard about a solutions approach. What was a bit trickier to determine was whether reader revenue could really be enhanced thanks to solutions journalism. And the reason why that is because tracking the connection between a donation from a reader, whether it's or like a subscription or a membership, is quite hard, and it would require some follow-up with the individual donor to figure out what led them to feel convinced to give money. And unfortunately, the newsrooms were not quite set up to be able to do that, and so it was hard for us to track that. But what we know from focus groups and other kind of listening work that some news organizations have done is that the solutions-focused work is very appealing to members in the communities that they serve. And there's a caveat there is that calling it solutions journalism isn't always the best idea, because it's a pretty jargony sort of concept, even within the journalism industry, but particularly for news consumers who aren't that well versed with all the lingo that we use in the industry. They sometimes feel like it actually is more akin to opinion journalism, which is really like not what it is. It's not about the journalist or the editor telling them what to think or what is the solution, but it's more exploring what is already done. And therefore, solution journalism is not a good term, according to them, to describe what they want.
Did you learn anything that does work in place of that for like a term, or you just don't mention it's a special kind of journalism or something like, or just investigative journalism? Maybe it's kind of along the same lines. I'm not
investigating what works, what exists to fix an issue. There's different ways to kind of describe it.
Okay, yeah, because I'm new. I don't come from a journalism background. I've just been kind of involved in this podcast and working with publishers just this year, basically. And I wasn't familiar with the term before. I kind of fell down the rabbit hole more, found people like you and everything. So I could see that being an issue with readers. And I could also see how difficult it would be to track that reader revenue. It's a lot of more data than you have access to of people's decision-making behind that, yeah.
Yeah, although I will say that we followed up on that project, that first cohort, with a piece of research that was led by Ned Burke, who is now at Blue Lena, who, I don't know exactly his title, but I would just say that he is exquisitely qualified to just track the behavior of readers on a particular website and understand what editorial content and strategies work and don't when it comes to increasing audience engagement and eventually also bringing them further down the funnel to convert them into financial supporters, to get them to open their wallet. And so we did some research pulling data from 12 newsrooms, different newsrooms from the ones that participated in the revenue cohort, and just kind of looked at how people engaged with solutions journalism that these newsrooms had produced. And what we found is that the way in which these readers connect with solutions journalism puts them in the segment of the audience that is most likely to become financial supporters. And so some of the indicators that we saw there were that these readers were much more likely to read other content on their website. They were much more likely to become return users. Their time on page was significantly higher. So those were all measures and indications that, solution journalism does really move the needle. But that research did not kind of come up with evidence connecting solution journalism to reader revenue per se. It just kind of showed that there was a propensity to attract readers that would be, financial supporters.
Yeah, that makes sense. Today's episode is sponsored by localpod.co. LocalPod offers podcast production and consulting for local news organizations and only local news organizations. LocalPod creates weekly news podcasts based off of the top stories from your publication. You provide the script, we handle the rest. We narrate your news, edit it, produce it with a custom intro and outro with music, and distribute the podcast to all available podcast apps. Your listeners will see your branding and hear your content in their podcast feed, just like wherever you're listening to right now. Podcasts are one of the most engaging digital formats, which is why we can also help you monetize your podcast as well. We offer custom ad reads for your podcast, and we can also set up subscriptions so that you can monetize your audience directly. Have you thought of launching a podcast but want to control it in-house? We can help you with that too. LocalPod offers podcast coaching. We offer in-depth one-on-one coaching calls, along with the actionable steps you need to launch a successful revenue-generating podcast of your own. To find out more, visit localpod.co. That's localpod.co. Or just click on the link in the episode show notes in your podcast app. All right, back to the show. You talked about how that first cohort was a range of different publishers, different ages, different sizes, all that stuff, different models. Were they all already aware and using solutions journalism? Was that something they were already into when they joined the cohort? Was that a part of it? Or was it more of an education piece there too?
So they definitely had an interest in solutions journalism, whether that was because there was some money associated with participation in the program and therefore this was a grant that they could access. We can be a bit cynical about that and say that might have been the driver, but no, all newsrooms that we at least selected for participation in that program had expressed a real interest and at least knowledge of it on paper. Now, as I mentioned, the crucial part here was to get them to actually produce solid solutions journalism, and that is something that for some of them took a little while. Others were pretty well versed in it, had already produced some solutions journalism, and were pretty much up to speed with it. However, what I will say, and this is perhaps the kind of limitations of the spread of solutions journalism, is that it requires real commitments and dedication to produce it in a sustained way, in a constant way, because depending on who is the editor, who is the journalist, the knowledge of how to do good solution journalism may kind of fluctuate, and so you just need one person to leave an organization for that knowledge to kind of evaporate and disappear, and so you have to kind of start all over again. But even then, solutions journalism, if you're not too familiar with it, can take a bit more time to do. And so it requires, more kind of resources and more focus to be able to deliver on that. So those are the challenges. But by and large, people were really bought in and see the value of solution journalism and were able to get feedback that spoke to them about how important it was for community members and their readers to pursue this approach.
That's great. So you're pretty deep in the weeds, just kind of with local news publishers, working with them, and on the solutions journalism side of it. I'm just curious your opinion. I like to get this from everybody on the future for local news from a business standpoint, because everybody has a different vantage point on it, and what they're seeing and what they're working with it. But what are your thoughts on the way things are moving right now and what the future holds in terms of revenue, where people should be focusing their efforts, maybe what should be, kind of letting go a little bit. I'd like to hear your take on that from what you're seeing.
Yeah, that's a complex question. I'm sure many of your other interviewees have really smart answers, probably much sharper than mine. But, my sense is that the future of local news is obviously facing difficult times. There is, more and more local publications that are closing by the week. However, the counterpoint to that is just a real energy and entrepreneurial stamina that exists among journalists and editors who want to do something about this collapse in local media ecosystem and are actually reviving organizations, setting up new ones. And I don't know if they're quite making up for the disappearances, but they're very much bringing and breathing new life into, local journalism in ways that I find to be extremely inspiring. As far as what, business models news organization ought to adopt, I think we can talk about the money part and the kind of revenue mix in a moment. But what's more important than that, in my opinion, is to think about how news organizations set themselves up and what is their value proposition when meeting the needs of the communities, the information needs of the communities that they aspire to serve. And money will come if those organizations, I think, put themselves forward as community conveners of conversations, of dialogue, if they are curious about what is being done in the community to address issues. So if they are solutions oriented, if they take the time to really engage deeply with the broad array of communities that exist in their midst and do the work of listening to what they care about and provide information that will help them meet their needs. And so, I think that, for example, what people call engagement journalism is really important. Service or utility journalism, giving people an idea of what actions they can take to address, X problem that they're facing with or they're faced with. Who do they need to go and consult and talk to? Who do they need to be in touch with? Providing that information, I think, is very much the role of news organizations. And yeah, I think off the back of that, there is an opportunity to build more transparency, more openness, build more trust, to be more collaborative with other news organizations, but also other civically minded organizations, mission-driven organizations that are mission-aligned based on their values. And off the back of that, I think there is the potential to grow revenue. I think the revenue mix that I would see and think is the most successful, particularly in the US, is certainly convincing local foundations to come on board and support pieces of the work, definitely tapping major donors who believe in the mission of the organization. I think there's money to be made from sponsorships for, again, their, corporate or businesses that also support the work that you're doing. And then on the whole, I think, building a membership program that can generate revenue from readers is key. And I say membership here as opposed to subscription, so that we move away from the kind of transactional nature of access to journalism, where people pay in exchange for access to a product. And the idea is, let's keep the information available and open to everyone for free. Let's make it democratically accessible, but let's make sure that some people, the people who've got the means, are able to contribute to keeping the information free by paying for it, because there is a cost to producing good quality journalism. And we need to prove the value of that journalism in order to be able to justify that it's worth paying for. And that's where I'll perhaps kind of shift towards something else that is really important for the work that I have been doing more recently at Solution Journalism Network. And that is foregrounding the importance of impact tracking. And that is, again, understanding what is happening as a result of the journalism that is being produced. What is the societal impact? And how can we tell a story about that impact based on information that we gather, feedback that we gather about the effects of the journalism? And I think a lot of news organizations have not yet invested enough in building cultures that are focused on tracking impact. And that is something that needs to happen amongst so many other things for local media. And so the question is, what level of priority does it has? But I think it does fit pretty highly on the list, in the sense that demonstrating the impact that you have, therefore the value, is key to be able to tell a story about what you're bringing, the positive that you're bringing to the communities that you're serving, and therefore to convincing financial stakeholders to come on board. And so basically reporting on the effects of your work is really essential, and packaging that information, making it available to convince people that, yeah, you're worth supporting.
Yeah, that's great. I think you may be the first person that's mentioned that kind of impact tracking, but that makes complete sense, from a kind of holistic look on the whole thing. What does the future hold for you in your career, Alec? What's going on? I believe you have a change coming up. I don't know if you want to talk about that on the podcast or not from our initial conversation.
Yeah. So I don't know when this podcast will be out, but yeah, I will have left solutions journalism at the end of October, and I'm not entirely sure what is coming up next. I am now based in Europe, in Brussels, and I'm eager to basically get back into an understanding of what is happening on the European continent when it comes to certainly like the development of local media and a range of different editorial practices that are happening here. I'll be also eager to bring what I've learned in the US to this European context and see if there are ways to infuse the dynamism of the entrepreneurialism happening in the US to the European context, where there's a lot of really phenomenal, great things happening already, and I celebrate all of that. But I think there are some opportunities that perhaps remain kind of a little untapped, and strategies that US North American counterparts are tapping into that could be emulated over here. And I'd be eager to be a vector in that, in collaboration with people who are already working on that kind of stuff here on the continent.
Excellent. Well, I touched on most of the stuff I wanted to get to. Is there anything I missed that you'd like to talk about, that you'd like to get out there from your experiences?
I'd probably listen back to this podcast and think I should have said everything differently. But no, I think I think we touched on most aspects. Particularly what I wanted to make sure to touch on was just the importance of impact tracking and how to tie that into just journalistic practices that I think everyone is trying to move the needle on: engagement, solution journalism, service journalism, really understanding the information needs of communities by doing deep listening work and activities, and kind of like folding that into the ethos of a news organization in order to make sure that it is as relevant as it could be and prove itself to be relevant and valuable enough to be well financially supported.
Excellent. What else would you like? What should I link to? Where can people find you or connect with you? Or what else do you want to promote or anything like that? Is there anything else?
Yeah, I'm not a great self-promoter, but one of the things that I've been trying to do recently is not about me, but it's more about presenting a bit of a behind the scenes of how we do impact tracking work and what the revenue focused work has looked like at SGN in the time that I've been there. And this is mostly based on the work that I've done in collaboration with colleagues and partners from our network. And so I'll be highlighting that on my LinkedIn profile. So that's LinkedIn, and I don't even know how to say it, but it's just Alec Saelens on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'll definitely link to it. I've got it pulled up right here. I was kind of reading your intro at the beginning, and I follow you. We're connected on LinkedIn. You just posted something great this morning, actually. I was just hopping on to get prepped for this episode, and you had a great post I was digging into just before we hopped on here. So everybody go connect with Alec if you're listening and follow along. Awesome. Alec, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This was fun. Look forward to not listening to myself, but listening to your other podcasts.
Excellent.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Small Press Big Ideas. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to help the show, the best thing you can do is to tell a friend or colleague and just take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It only takes a minute out of your day, but it really does help the podcast grow and reach more ears. Check back for new episodes every Monday.